We all know we're in a crisis, right? Biodiversity is just collapsing all around us. But what if the real problem isn't just, pollution or plastic straws? What if it's something deeper, something baked into the very rules we've created to own and protect nature? That's what we're going to get into today.
Okay, let's start with a number. 73%. Just let that sink in for a second. That's the average drop in wildlife populations. We're talking mammals, birds, fish, everything, since 1970. That's according to the World Wildlife Fund. I mean, that is a staggering number, and it screams that something is fundamentally, systemically broken. So, what gives? Why are we failing so badly? Well, the argument we're exploring here is that the problem isn't just on the surface. It's buried deep inside our economic and legal systems. It's all about how we define ownership itself, and how those rules, well, they just can't keep up with the planet. And at the very heart of that is something called property rights theory, or PRT. It sounds complicated, but it's really not. It's just the basic set of rules that says, hey, you own this, here's how you can use it, and you're responsible for it. The whole idea is pretty simple, right? If you own something, you're going to take care of it. But, and this is a huge but, there's a catch. Property rights theory was built for a totally different world. It was designed for things that are stable, predictable, a plot of land, a factory. But when you try to apply those same rules to something as complex and interconnected and alive as an ecosystem, the whole thing just falls apart. And that brings us to the core issue here, this fundamental mismatch. It's a clash between economic time, which is all about the here and now, the next quarter, and ecological time, which, unfolds over decades, centuries, millennia. The source material we're looking at has this brilliant name for this problem: intertemporal blind spots. I love that. It perfectly captures how our legal and economic systems are just built to fail when it comes to long-term stuff. They can't see, they can't value, and they can't enforce obligations that stretch way out into the future. The analogy they use is perfect. It's like we're driving a car, but we're only looking at the speedometer and the fuel gauge, completely ignoring the massive cliff up the road. So let's look at the first blind spot. It's called delayed externalities. Here's a classic example. A company pollutes a river. They get all the profit right now, today. But the costs, the dead fish, the unusable water, that gets pushed onto communities down the road, maybe years later. You see the problem? The benefit is now, the cost is later, and our rulebook has no idea how to connect the two. All right, blind spot number 2 is time-inconsistent enforcement. So picture this. A government makes a big promise, right? We will protect this forest for the next 50 years. It sounds great, but what happens 5 years later when there's a new government? Or 10 years later when budgets get slashed? Suddenly that promise just kind of evaporates. The enforcement just vanishes. Okay, so there are actually 6 of these blind spots in total. Things like intergenerational exclusion, which basically means future generations don't get a vote, and path dependence, where we're just stuck using old, outdated rules because that's how we've always done it. The point is, each one of these blind spots chips away at the foundation of what makes property rights work. And the main takeaway, the really crucial thing to get here, is that our rules are fundamentally built with short-term memory, and that makes them completely unfit for protecting anything long-term, especially our environment. So that's the problem. Our system has amnesia. How do we fix it? Well, this is where things get really interesting. The paper we're drawing from points to a pretty unlikely hero: blockchain. Now, hold on. Forget all the crypto hype and speculation. That's not what we're talking about here. Think of blockchain as a very specific tool, a temporal corrective, designed to fix our system's broken memory. And the source gives us this fantastic way to think about it. Imagine a contract with a perfect memory, or a time-traveling notary. That's what blockchain can be in this context. It creates this permanent, unchangeable digital record of promises and obligations. It's a record that can't just be forgotten or quietly changed when a new CEO or a new government comes along. Okay, so how does it actually pull this off? Well, it's got kind of 3 superpowers. First up is traceability. Everything gets recorded on an unchangeable, time-stamped ledger. Second, conditionality. This is done using smart contracts, which are just bits of code that automatically do things when specific conditions are met. And third, tokenization. This is the ability to turn ecological value, like, say, a ton of carbon stored in a tree, into a digital token that you can track and trade. Now, this isn't just a bunch of theory, which is the cool part. We're going to look at some actual real-world projects that are already using these ideas right now to give our environmental rules that memory upgrade they so desperately need. Okay, first example, Fishcoin. This project is going right after that delayed externalities problem we talked about, but in the seafood industry. I mean, you know the problem, right? You go to the store, and it's basically impossible to know if the fish you're about to buy was caught sustainably or not. So here's the solution Fishcoin came up with. They tokenize the seafood. Basically, they create a digital version of the fish on the blockchain. And as that real fish moves from the boat to the processor to the store, its digital twin is tracked every step of the way. And here's the clever part. Fishers who can prove they're using sustainable methods get automatically rewarded with these tokens. See what that does? It directly connects the good action with an immediate reward. It closes that time gap. Okay, that's one problem down. But what about that other one we talked about, the whole 50-year promise that just fades away? How in the world do you make sure that the money you donate today to save a rainforest is actually, still protecting it 10, 20, 30 years from now? Well, this is exactly the problem that a project called Gain Forest is trying to solve. Here's how it works. When you donate, your money doesn't just go into a bank account. It gets locked into a smart contract. And that money only gets released to the conservation group on the ground when, and this is key, when satellite data and drone imagery prove that the forest is being protected. If there are no results, there's no payment. It's basically automated long-term enforcement. All right, now let's get into a really wild, kind of futuristic idea. It's called Terracer. And this project asks a fascinating question. What if a forest could own and manage itself? What if it could completely bypass us, slow, unreliable humans and our institutions? So the idea is that the Terra forest would have sensors all over it, monitoring its own health, tracking tree growth, soil moisture, that kind of thing. And smart contracts would use all that data to make decisions on their own. Decisions like, okay, it's time to sustainably harvest a few trees over here and use the money to replant over there. The ultimate goal is to create a totally self-sustaining ecosystem that can finally act in its own best long-term interest. Okay, so those examples are pretty inspiring, right? But now we have to pump the brakes a little bit and get a dose of reality, because the source material is very, very clear on this point. Blockchain is a powerful tool, for sure, but it is not, I repeat, not a magic bullet that's going to save the planet on its own. And there are some massive challenges. First, there's something called the oracle problem. Think about it. The blockchain is unchangeable. So what happens if you feed it bad data? You've just locked in a mistake forever. Then you've got the huge costs, the technical complexity, and a really serious risk of making old injustices even worse. For instance, imagine you tokenize land based on current property records. You could end up permanently locking out indigenous communities who have historical claims but no official paperwork. And look, these aren't just theoretical what-ifs. There was a platform called the Nori Marketplace. It was a really promising blockchain for carbon credits, but it had to shut down in 2024. It's a real-world reminder of just how incredibly difficult it is to build the trust and the money and the momentum these systems need to actually work. And that really brings us to what might be the single most important point of this whole thing. The technology is only ever as good as the human systems we build around it. It needs solid legal frameworks, it needs real scientific verification, it needs buy-in and trust from local communities. Without all that, it's worthless. Technology by itself is never, ever enough. So yeah, the takeaway is that blockchain can be a powerful amplifier, but it only amplifies what we feed it. Garbage in means garbage out, permanently. So here's the question we're left with. This technology, blockchain, it might just be able to fix our system's terrible memory. It could help us create promises that actually last for generations. But here's the thing the technology can't do. It can't tell us what promises we should be making in the first place. It can give our rules a perfect memory, sure, but it's still on us to give them wisdom.